The year was 1773. Boston, Massachusetts, a bustling colonial port town, lay shivering under a biting December wind. The harbor's waters, dark as ink, reflected the faint glimmer of lanterns from the docks. Smoke curled from chimney tops, mixing with the sharp scent of salt and tar. It was the kind of cold that bit through wool and froze breath in the air. But beneath this winter calm, Boston was no peaceful town. The edge, a tinderbox waiting for a single spark. For over a decade, the colonists had felt the tightening grip of British rule. At first, they protested politely, appealing to the king for fair treatment. They considered themselves proud English subjects, entitled to the same rights as any man in London. But London had other ideas. Laws came like waves, each one heavier than the last. Taxes on paper, taxes on glass, taxes on paint and lead, and most infuriating of all, taxes on tea, the drink that warmed every colonial hearth. To the people of Boston, the issue was not the pennies added to the price. It was the insult, the notion that Parliament in far-off England could reach into their pockets without their consent. No taxation without representation, they declared. But their words fell on deaf ears in London. By late November, the air in Boston was thick with rumors. 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, were sailing toward the harbor, each carrying crates upon crates of East India Company tea. The government's message was clear: you will accept this tea, you will pay the tax, and you will obey. But Boston was not a city that bowed easily. Angry meetings spilled from taverns into the streets. In the shadows, the Sons of Liberty, a secretive group of rebels led by fiery men like Samuel Adams, plotted their response. Ordinary merchants, dockworkers, and farmers joined them, united by a single truth: if the tea was unloaded, their resistance would be shattered. Winter tightened its grip, the ships drew closer, and in every narrow alley and crowded wharf, there was a question hanging in the air, a question no one dared to answer aloud. How far are we willing to go? The storm had not yet broken, but its winds were rising. To understand the fury brewing in Boston, one must first look across the ocean, to the heart of Britain's empire. The year was 1773, and the British East India Company, once the crown jewel of British trade, was sinking under the weight of debt. Its warehouses bulged with tea, mountains of it, unsold and rotting, while its finances bled from years of mismanagement and global conflict. In Parliament, the company's friends and allies, many of them powerful men with personal fortunes tied to its survival, knew something had to be done. The solution, at least to them, seemed elegant. Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773, a law that on the surface looked harmless, even generous. It allowed the East India Company to sell tea directly to the American colonies, bypassing middlemen and undercutting the price of smugglers' tea from places like Holland. Even with the small tax attached, British tea would now be cheaper than anything else in the colonies. On paper, it was a bargain. In reality, it was a trap. The price might have been lower, but accepting the tea meant accepting Parliament's right to tax the colonies, a principle the colonists had been resisting for over a decade. If they gave in now, they would be surrendering the very argument they had fought to defend: that no Englishman should be taxed without a voice in the government that taxed him. In Boston, the reaction was swift and sharp. Smugglers feared for their trade, merchants for their independence, and patriots for their liberties. The radicals among them saw the Tea Act not as an act of kindness, but as a calculated move to make the colonies dependent on Britain's wool, a leash disguised as a gift. Samuel Adams, the fiery orator and master of protest: whoever accepts this tea, accepts the chains that come with it. From New York to Philadelphia, towns began to organize resistance. In some ports, tea ships were turned away before they could dock. In others, local merchants refused to unload the cargo. But Boston was different. Boston's governor, Thomas Hutchinson, was a loyal servant of the crown. He would not back down. He would not send the ships home. And so the stage was set: 3 ships heavy with tea, an angry city refusing to touch it, and a deadline fast approaching. The gamble Britain thought would save its company was about to cost it something far greater. The first ship came quietly, slipping into Boston harbor under a gray November sky. It was the Dartmouth, its wooden hull heavy with 114 chests of East India Company tea. Behind it, the Eleanor and the Beaver would soon follow, each carrying their own cargo of the same bitter symbol of British authority. The moment the Dartmouth anchored, the city's mood shifted. Word spread like wildfire: the tea was here. The people of Boston knew the rules. Once a ship entered the harbor, it had 20 days to unload its cargo, pay the duty, and send the goods ashore. If the deadline passed and the tea remained unpaid, customs officials could seize it, sell it themselves, and force the tax to be paid regardless. The math was simple. If the tea touched land, Parliament's claim over the colonies would be carved into stone. From the start, Boston's leaders made their position clear: the tea would not be unloaded. Mass meetings were called at Faneuil Hall, then later moved to the larger Old South Meeting House as the crowds swelled beyond the hall's walls. On the docks, British soldiers and customs officials kept watch over the ships, their red coats a constant reminder of the king's power. Onshore, members of the Sons of Liberty kept their own vigil, ensuring no crate of tea was smuggled out in the dead of night. The harbor became a chessboard, every move watched, every shadow suspect. Governor Thomas Hutchinson, a man both proud and stubborn, stood like a wall against the protests. He refused to let the ships depart. To him, sending them back empty would be a surrender to mob rule. Each day he dug in deeper, knowing full well that the standoff was turning into something far greater than a dispute over tea. The city became restless. Dockworkers muttered in taverns. Merchants paced their counting rooms. Even children whispered about the ships that sat like ghosts in the harbor, their masts black against the winter sky. And then came the calendar's cruel reminder, the deadline. The Dartmouth's 20 days would expire on December 16, 1773. If nothing changed by then, the tea would be seized and unloaded by force. Boston was now a city with a ticking clock. Every creak of the harbor's wharves, every icy gust off the water carried the same unspoken question: when the deadline comes, will we yield, or will we resist?